The world today feels like it's standing on the edge of a knife. What started as a regional war between Russia and Ukraine in 2022 has spiraled into something far more dangerous. A proxy battlefield where NATO, the European Union, and the United States are increasingly drawn in. And now, 5 alarming developments suggest that World War III may not just be a distant nightmare, it could be right around the corner. Welcome to TFI Global. Join us as we break down these 5 signs and explore their implications for the future of global security. First, Russia's foreign minister accuses NATO and European Union of declaring war. On September 25 at the United Nations, Russia's foreign minister Sergei Lavrov delivered a fiery statement that shocked the diplomatic world. He declared that NATO and the European Union had basically declared war on Russia by arming Ukraine, imposing crushing sanctions and directly supporting the battlefield effort. This was more than diplomatic posturing. By pointing out NATO's direct involvement, Moscow highlighted a dangerous reality, suggesting that the Western powers are no longer just supporting Ukraine, they are active participants in the conflict. In Russia's view, this opens the door to treating NATO's supply lines, bases in Eastern Europe, and even military infrastructure in the Baltics as legitimate military targets. What the West calls brinksmanship, Russia sees as necessary defense. Unlike during the Cold War, when deterrence was the guiding principle, today's situation is shaped by NATO's expansion and direct interference on Russia's borders. With Moscow's updated nuclear doctrine allowing preemptive measures against existential threats, Lavrov's words should be understood not as an escalation, but as a warning that continued Western aggression could force Russia to act decisively. Second, Zelensky's bomb shelter warning and Medvedev's nuclear report. Just hours after Lavrov's remarks, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky raised the stakes even higher. In an interview, he bluntly told Vladimir Putin and his inner circle to know where the nearest bomb shelter is, inside the Kremlin. His point? Ukraine's expanding arsenal of long-range missiles, supplied in part by Western allies, could now strike deep into Russian territory. But the response from Moscow was chilling. Dmitry Medvedev, Russia's former president and now deputy chairman of the Security Council, fired back saying Russia can use weapons that a bomb shelter won't protect against. Americans should also keep this in mind. That wasn't subtle. Medvedev was pointing to Russia's nuclear and hypersonic arsenal. What we're seeing here is the personalization of war, no longer about formalities in Donbass, but about the survival of leadership itself. When nuclear-armed states start making threats like this, miscalculation becomes the greatest danger. One wrong strike could set off a chain reaction no one can control. Third, NATO leaders and Trump endorsed shooting down Russian jets. If the skies over Europe weren't tense enough, 3 leaders just added fuel to the fire. NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte, European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen, and US President Donald Trump all signaled support for shooting down Russian planes that violate NATO airspace. Von der Leyen said on CNN that such action is on the table. Rutte echoed the statement, and Trump, when pressed by reporters, simply said, "Yes, I do." Think about that. NATO's top leadership and the US president just endorsed open confrontation with Russian aircraft. And this isn't a hypothetical scenario. Russian jets and drones have been testing NATO air defenses for months, buzzing the borders of Poland, Romania, and the Baltics. History reminds us just how dangerous this is. In 1983, the Soviet Union shot down a Korean airliner it mistook for a US spy plane, nearly triggering nuclear war. Now imagine that same situation today, but with hypersonic missiles, cyber weapons, and a war already raging in Eastern Europe. One misstep in the skies could ignite a firestorm. Fourth, Pentagon's secret meeting with top generals. On September 30, something unusual will happen in Virginia. US Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth has called a massive last-minute meeting of America's top generals and admirals at Quantico. Hundreds of them, and the agenda completely undisclosed. Media outlets are calling it a mystery summit. President Trump has tried to brush it off as a friendly get-together, but insiders suggest otherwise. The last time the Pentagon held a meeting on this scale was before the Iraq War. So what's what's going on. Analysts believe this could be an urgent wargaming planning for scenarios where the Ukraine conflict spills directly into NATO territory. It could involve mobilizing reserves, moving assets to Europe, or preparing for attacks on Russia. In other words, the US military seems to be bracing for something big, and when the Pentagon quietly shifts on crisis mode, the rest of the world should pay attention. Fifth, Poland orders citizens out of Belarus. Finally, we come to Poland. On September 25, Warsaw's embassy in Minsk issued a stark advisory that all Polish citizens should immediately leave Belarus. Here's why this matters. Belarus isn't officially at war, but it has been Russia's closest ally and staging ground for much of the Ukraine invasion. Zapad 2025, a massive joint exercise, just simulated a NATO invasion with Russian troops stationed across Belarus. So why would Poland sound the alarm now? Analysts say it's about preempting a spillover, whether Belarus formally joins the war or NATO's confrontation. For Poland, which hosts US troops and missile defenses, the border with Belarus isn't just a frontier. It's a potential flashpoint that could trigger NATO's Article 5. When a NATO state tells its citizens to flee a neighbor, it's not just a precaution, it's a sign that war could be closer than anyone admits. Put these 5 signs together and the picture is terrifying. Russia openly accuses NATO and the European Union of declaring war. Leaders on both sides trade threats involving the nuclear weapons. NATO and the US prepare to shoot down Russian planes. The Pentagon holds a secretive summit with top generals, and Poland treats Belarus like an active war zone. This isn't business as usual. This is a chain reaction forming before our eyes, one spark away from global conflict. But history also offers hope. The Cuban Missile Crisis of 1962 showed that even when the world stands on the brink, diplomacy and back-channel talks can avert disaster. The question now is whether today's leaders, Trump, Putin, Zelensky, and NATO's chiefs, are willing to step back before the unthinkable becomes the reality. World War III isn't inevitable, but ignoring these warnings makes it far more likely. The world is watching and the clock is ticking.